Today, I'd like to discuss a kind of very common but main theme within the various types of Buddhisms, different Buddhist traditions, which is the theme of taking refuge. This is a big one, and this is sort of some content meant for those of you who are a little more interested in framing your meditation practice within a Buddhist context, or you're already Buddhist, or for what I call the Buddhist curious. You're just kind of interested in how you can deepen your meditation and more or less like relationship to life through this. So normally taking refuge we consider to be the entranceway into the Buddhist path. Some view it as an entranceway into becoming, quote, Buddhist, which is fine. For me, I think it's what's more important than being Buddhist necessarily is actually entering the Buddhist path, understanding that this is a path that can lead us towards genuine inner freedom, that can not only help us to experience more absolute or ultimate peace and freedom and openness and compassion for ourselves, but also can help us to serve others much more skillfully. And of course, some of this is in the wider field of what we, talk about when we talk about enlightenment, Buddhahood, awakening, which again, for a lot of people would go into the religious sort of section of something. For Buddhists, it's just a science. It's a way of looking at deeper aspects of what the universe is and what consciousness actually is. But again, that's not really the topic of today, but just wanted to mention it. But wherever you're at, you're welcome. That's more or less what I'm trying to say. And just sort of share some of my viewpoints here. So as I said, taking refuge is usually the entranceway into the Buddhist path. It's usually done once we have, learned at least a little bit, if not a decent amount, about the Buddha Dharma. We find it both useful for our understanding of life, framing of life, as well as how to integrate it into meditation practice. We start to feel some confidence in the Dharma that, hey, this Buddha Dharma, these teachings of the Buddha can really help me. I think they can really help me. And I want to commit to this as a path. And that's when this principle of taking refuge enters. For those who are taking refuge through traditional Buddhist lineages, be it sort of Theravada Buddhism, Himalayan Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, etc., there are ceremonies. There's actual ceremonies with the Sangha, with the community, with teachers who provide the lineage of the refuge vows, where we kind of formalize our refuge. For me, that's beautiful. I've done it, but I think it's actually less important than our heart having us having a change of heart, that we're sort of switching our mind, we're switching our attitude from seeking one way of relief for our suffering, which is primarily through materialism and, problem solution mentality, or just sort of, as I say, ping-ponging between sort of pleasure, pain. So we see that as faulty. We see that as ineffective and like a dead end. And then we turn our mind towards the Dharma, which offers another way to do it, right? Mainly through the three characteristics, or the four seals, which are impermanence, dukkha, emptiness or Buddhist non-duality, and nirvana, which would be liberation itself. So we investigate those, we work with those as a path, and we work with meditation, contemplation, etc., as a path to understand those as sort of fundamentals to the nature of existence and how to become free, essentially. So when we shift, when we have a change of heart from sort of materialism and ping-pong relationship to sort of just, pleasure seeking, we start to shift to another way of being. And I'll say this is not a overnight thing. Though of course, some of us can have really strong connections with the lineages of Buddhism. When we read it, it can make a lot of sense to some of us. And that change of heart can be quite strong and sudden for some people. Yet what I found is it's like a layering in process, where as we study the Dharma, as we deepen our relationship to it on our level of understanding and conceptualizing it, deepening our relationship deepening our relationship and contemplating it, which makes it more experiential. And then, of course, in meditation, where we actually try to directly see whether there's truth in it or not. This is, at least for me, it's been layering in and continues to layer, and I'm okay with that. I'm much more a fan of process-oriented meditation and Dharma practice than sort of like, I need to get to this goal and then I'm okay. I think that's that same mentality that actually we need to have a change of heart from, in my opinion. So anyways, refuge helps us with this, and refuge grows, right? So it's not like it's not a single decision and then we're there. It's actually a practice in and of itself. And one of my favorite ways of thinking about refuge these days is not the idea of taking refuge, but the idea of becoming, and I guess you could say, enhancing being a refugee. So becoming a refugee and then layering into our buy-in of what that means, essentially. So this principle of being a refugee or becoming a refugee, I was first introduced to this by the well-known Tibetan Buddhist teacher Chögyam Trungpa, who, for some of you, maybe he's a controversial figure. Personally, I just find his teachings incredibly impactful and beneficial. And so, whether we like the person or not, the teachings themselves are so powerful once you study the Dharma. And, I have my first Tibetan teacher, Geshe Tsoga, he's a monk from Eastern Tibet. He had this phrase where he used to say, the bee doesn't necessarily have to like the flower, but it can go to the middle of the flower to take the pollen, right? It can understand the essence. And there's another maybe for another video, but or another episode here, but essentially, when we study the Dharma, when we contemplate and meditate on it, actually we get more skillful at going to the essence, right? Meaning, like, we understand, we can go to the meaning and the depth of what someone is actually saying. Doesn't mean they're a perfect person, right? So anyways, another video, but I'll just say something about it here. So I personally find Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche's teachings not only incredibly insightful and deep, but transformational. I often read them and I have experiences just reading him. So incredibly powerful teacher, in my opinion, and teachings. So I'm going to read an excerpt from a series of books where some of the students put together teachings on the three yanas. It's called I believe, The Profound Treasury of an Ocean of Dharma, and there's 3 volumes. You can get the books, and this is in the first volume, and it's the chapter on taking refuge. But here again, there's a subchapter where he talks about becoming a refugee. And as I said, this really transformed my relationship to refuge for me, and so I just wanted to share it with you. So I'm just going to read a few paragraphs, not the whole section, but just a few that I find kind of really getting to the point here. So he says, quote, "In ordinary language, taking refuge means seeking shelter. But in this case, it means something slightly different. The Sanskrit refuge phrase, Sharanam Gacchami, I go for refuge, does not imply that you are helpless and must seek support on somebody else's arm. It means leaving your home country and becoming a refugee. As a refugee, you are leaving your personal world or your personal state of mind, which is your home ground. Although it's questionable whether anybody will accept you as a refugee, you must step out of your country and become stateless. In fact, you have become a refugee already in that you are relating to the Buddhist world, which is no country. But this stateless country extends to the rest of the universe. When you take refuge, you are opening yourself up and jumping into new territory, which isn't actually a territory, but a wasteland, completely open ground. To take refuge requires strength and willingness. It means you must give up your individual preoccupations and obsessions, the personal favoritisms that maintain your existence. If a would-be student of Buddhism has a particular talent that is not pure talent, but an ego-oriented talent that has helped that person maintain his or her existence all along, that has to be given up. You have to become an ordinary citizen. That is the true definition of humility. So I could go on. He goes on to describe what he means by refugee, but I think these get to the heart of it. and it's pretty powerful. I mean, even just reading it now for probably the 15th time, man, it's so deep what he's referring to here, because what he's referring to, what he is, I guess, sharing with us, encouraging us in, is really the heart of Buddhism, which is to understand that our ego clinging, our clinging to some kind of identity, whatever we think that is right now, in the body, in the mind, etc. I'm not saying having it, I'm saying clinging to it, that will cause suffering. And that ultimately is an unstable ground that we're trying to find stability on. It's like trying to find stability on a melting ice cube, essentially. So here he's using this principle of taking refuge, but turning it into a practice of becoming a refugee. And I usually say, like, actually, like, deliberately deepening our refugee status, right? He even says the Buddhism itself, it's not it's what did he say? It's a stateless state. Yeah, completely open ground. And this is tough to understand, right? Because ultimately the Buddhist path is to pull the rug out from under landing anywhere in any kind of ego-identified position. Initially, this is scary. I mean, when I read these words, there's a little bit of fear that comes up. Delight, because I kind of understand what he's pointing to, and I'm interested in that. But it's scary, because what have we relied on in our life but, clinging to our emotions, clinging to our thoughts, clinging to whatever beliefs we have about ourselves and the world. And when we're releasing that, when we're letting go of that, it's really scary, because we're in this in-between state where we don't know what's next. We don't, completely trust it, maybe. And that's the process of also deepening our refugee status, is trusting the Dharma more. But we have to trust it based on our experience. We have to trust it based on having direct truths pointed out to us through processing the Dharma and actually practicing it, putting it into practice in meditation. So this isn't about belief. It's about deepening our refugee status through actually practicing the Dharma. And even though there's no ground, it starts to be okay, because we start to realize there's another kind of joy, there's another kind of peace that's much more fulfilling than the ego-centered one, the self-centered, cherishing one, the one that's all about me, that's always trying to protect ourselves, protect what we think is worthy of protecting, fear and push away everything else. That's a really, really horrible way to live, yet most of us, myself included, are stuck in that. So I just even find the idea that there's another way to be as so encouraging, so uplifting, right? And so some people might take this to be nihilistic. I take it as sort of like a prompt that we may be using our energy and agency towards a dead end. And actually, if we free up our energy and point it in another direction, this might possibly provide an infinite end, essentially, right? That's essentially what Buddhahood is, what enlightenment is. We just enter the flow of what reality actually is, instead of always constantly building up reality, building up ego clinging, attachment, aversion, ignorance, controlling the show. It's kind of exhausting. And so becoming a refugee is having some semblance of exhaustion with that, right? But of course, we need to have insight into that. That's also important. And how do you say it? I don't know. The traditional teachings say we don't permanently stay a refugee. They say, like, our refugee status kind of ends at the time of enlightenment. Yeah, and I can sort of go with that in general. I believe that. I don't know 100%, obviously, because I'm not enlightened, but I could see that's possible. But either way, just on the path, what richness to sort of give up needing to establish ground. So essentially what this is saying is, like, we learn to flow, and we learn to flow with awareness, which we're cultivating in meditation. We start to have insight into impermanence, into the nature of reality, into where we get stuck and how to get unstuck, right? And this offers another kind of joy. I haven't met a Buddhist master who's not that, incredibly joyful. I mean, some can be very serious and stern, depending on the tradition or lineage. But there's this underlying joy, whether it comes out in a smile or not, there's this ease and joy. So why? Because they let go of clinging. They learned how to do that. They learned how to leap into the open space of being a refugee, and this led to the fruition, or at least some fruition, on the path. So, anyways, just some thoughts here. I encourage you to kind of read more from Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche on this. But nonetheless, I thought this has kind of changed my practice to how I think of refuge. Rather than a single moment or something I do in the morning before I do meditation, I recite it. It's an actual practice all day long of trying to stay a refugee. Because all the time my attention, my clinging wants to go back to sort of finding some ground, finding some, state, some kind of state here, meaning like place, country, right? That I can sort of sink my teeth into, but that ultimately leads to dissatisfaction. I've noticed it leads to exhaustion, and so why do I want to keep putting energy into a melting ice cube, essentially? But the habits are strong, so I'm there with you. This isn't something I'm saying happens in a day. I'm not also saying I've completed it. What I try to do is deepen my refugee status. And I've noticed it's only brought in more joy because, there's another way that we start to find a little more flow, a little more openness, a little more compassion towards, just being in this experience of life, which is challenging for all of us, no matter who we are in the world. It's challenging, right? So anyways, I'll leave it there. Just wanted to talk about that a little bit. And yeah, let me know if you're interested in hearing more. I'm happy to do a whole series on refuge or do a little bit more content on it, and some more traditional approaches to Dharma. Okay. Thanks so much. Take care.